Thank you for tuning in to Front Porch Conversations today. We're here at the Harmony Center at Advent Christian Village, and it's a little hot to be on a porch anywhere today in Florida. So we're going to have a cool conversation. I'd like to introduce you to our guests today, Bob and Robin Copeland. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, a lot of times our conversations are with people who live in the village. Today we have two people who are currently working at the village, but living nearby, whose story has a lot to connect over the years with Advent Christian denomination and the village as well.
Yes.
So let's get started. Where were you born, Bob?
I was born in a little town about 30 miles west of Boston, Massachusetts called Hopedale. Yes, Hopedale, Massachusetts.
And Robin?
And I was born in Massachusetts as well, but I would say near, in a little town called Charlton.
And it took a while for y'all to meet each other.
Yes, college. I would say college is where we met.
After college, really.
Post.
Yeah.
We knew of one another
Correct.
in college.
Yes.
Yes, I was a freshman at Berkshire when I was a senior at Berkshire when he was a freshman. Yeah.
Well, I think let's don't jump completely to your college experience yet. Tell us a little bit about your family when you were growing up, Robin, and where you lived.
I was raised Catholic. Well, when you're from that area, my mother is French Canadian, and my father is English Canadian, and moved down from the islands up above Maine and settled in that area of Worcester County. And so I was raised my first 12 years in Catholicism. My mother was introduced, always had a love for God. It was just a spiritual aspect about her. And she was introduced to Christ in her 30s through the charismatic movement that was going on in the 70s. And I came to know Christ as well under my mother's evangelistic fervor. And we ended up in a little Advent Christian church that was about a mile and a half from our house. I have 3 siblings, all younger than I. I'm the oldest.
Bob, what about you?
I'm the middle child. I have 2 brothers, one 2 years older, one 2 years younger than me. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I grew up in a very kind home. But we went to church across the street simply because of the location, Unitarian Universalist. So I was raised Unitarian Universalist. And when I came to the end of my high school career, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I did know I wanted to join the military, so I joined the Navy. I was in the Seabees, and which was a great experience for me. I was a kid when I went in, and I learned responsibility, patriotism, a lot of good things like that. But the key thing for me was that's where I met the Lord. So while I was halfway around the world on the island of Guam, a missionary with Campus Crusade for Christ led me to the Lord. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life. It changed my life. It changed my future. And soon after that, God called me into the ministry. So, and even I remember telling my mom, yeah, I think I'm called to be a pastor. Really? So, but
Surprise to her.
Yeah, it was.
What were the things you enjoyed growing up?
The things I enjoyed growing up, I lived in a small little town. It was a huge factory in town, and everything was based around that town. So before I came along, they had built all kinds of things like ball fields. The company did all this for the town. And so when I came around, we had a park program in the summers, and it was like from 9 to 12. We would all go to the park, and we would play wiffle ball, street hockey, tetherball. They had crafts for those who wanted to do that. So I was there in the mornings, and then my afternoons we had a pond that everybody swam in, and I always chuckled because they would take the 55-gallon drum out and pour all that chemical into the pond, and then we would swim. I'm sure they'd have a fit today, but anyway, to get rid of all the weeds and stuff. But so I spent my summers park and pond, riding bikes, those kind of things.
What about you, Robin?
One of my most fondest memories is we spent a year taking care of a farm that had horses, Welsh horses and cows. I was fourth grade, I think it was fourth grade. I have some vivid memories of farm life and in the barn and in the hay and the crazy things that we did and the fun that we had and eating. I can remember eating grain for the horses for snack after school because we went right to doing chores. But I have some vivid memories, and I sometimes think that my siblings and I could write some books about Tamarack Farm and that wonderful part. But I remember being outside and playing and just imagination, full of imagination, and good friends.
So both of you graduated from high school.
Correct.
And got to Berkshire College.
I went right away. Yeah.
You took a detour.
I took a detour. I had to go to the Navy and find Jesus. So.
Yeah.
Not everybody can say that, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That is quite a story, part of my testimony.
We're going to ask you about that.
Okay.
So I went right after high school. It was during a time, I was actually 17 when I started college because my birthday is in the fall. So my intentions were, I chose Berkshire. I was first in my generation on both my mother and father's side to go to college. Didn't know what I was going to do except that I felt a call into ministry. I had the blessing of going to camp up in New Hampshire. There's a sports and music camp that was up there where Coach Peters and Wes Ross were there, and I did the music part. I loved the music part and the singing. I was very much involved in several choirs and the band when I was in high school and did that kind of thing. And so I did that in college as well. Love music, sports, not. I don't even like to watch it very much. But love music, and so I went with the intention of getting my bachelor's in Christian education and serving somehow. Felt the call to full-time ministry while I was at camp, so I wanted to go and serve somewhere and work with children and work with youth at that time. So plans changed. I took a gift search, and I was encouraged to go ahead and get my teaching certificate. So I went in elementary education as opposed to Christian education. Very thankful. Only God knew what my journey would be. I met and married. My sophomore year, I met and married my first husband, Scott Toll. We were married 3 years, and he had a grand mal seizure on Father's Day weekend of 1985, and we had a son that was just almost a year old, and within 2 years, I was a single parent. That was during my college years, and soon after, we were serving at Berkshire. After I graduated, I didn't go into teaching. I served in the kitchen with Mom Flynn, and we switched roles and did some things. I was baking at the time and very pregnant, and then had my oldest son, Brad, and then we switched roles, and I was a supervisor to peers and managed the kitchen up at Berkshire. But then we had a situation where things were changing there, and my first husband just made the decision we didn't have property, so my father offered half of his acreage in the place where, and only God knew. We bought the property with the stipulation that we had to build something on it. And it was during that period of time where we moved, and then my first husband had that grand mal seizure. I was right where I needed to be taken care of, and for my son and I to be in a place where my family could help us through the illness and the death of my first husband. So not a way that life happens for a 23, 25. I was widowed at 25. I remember, though, my senior year, both Bob and I guess I'm going to segue into this because this happened in college. Right. Bob and I were taking a American history or American lit. One of us was taking one when the other, and we always took a field trip out to Lexington and Concord. And I could remember, and I don't even know why, I remember getting into the back of his car and thinking in the back of my mind, what a gentle man. He would make someone a great husband someday. Of course, I was married at the time. I wasn't thinking anything but, this is a great man, and never thinking that the Lord would bring us together. I don't know how many years later, but I remember thinking that, very impressed by his character and who he was on that day. I remember it. You don't remember me even riding in the vehicle.
Did you say it was a character or I had character?
Yes. yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your career at Berkshire, would you talk
Sure,
a little bit about
yeah. So, of course, I joined the Navy and came to know Christ. And what happened for me was I had a chaplain who was just a godly man. And not only did the man preach the gospel, he discipled people. So he discipled me. And as I was watching him, I felt the call to God. Now, it wasn't a big, loud, thunderous thing, but I just had the thought hit me one day, I want to do what he's doing. And so I was like, wow, I need to figure out how I'm going to do this. And my chaplain was encouraging me. I was 19 when I accepted the Lord halfway through my tour. I joined when I was 17, graduated from high school. And so when I was 19, I came to faith in Christ. That was January of 81. In August, my chaplain said, I'm going to be gone and you're going to preach. I said, really?
This was the Navy chaplain.
This was the Navy chaplain. You're going to preach Sunday I'm gone. I said, okay. He knew God was calling me. He saw all that was going on. So my very first sermon, actually it's coming up August 23rd, 1981. So this, in a couple weeks, it'll be 42 years ago that I preached my first sermon. It's hard to believe. So I remember, but I told them when I get up there, because remember I'm a kid too, but I said, if you hear knocking, don't go answer the door. It's my knees, because I couldn't believe I was about to do what I was going to do. But it confirmed the call that I saw in my chaplain. So I said, well, I've been away from New England, so I want to go back near home. And so I pulled Lovejoy's College Guide off the shelf and I looked through. And this is amazing. At that time in New England, there was only one accredited Bible college. There were seminaries, there were Christian liberal arts colleges, there were unaccredited Bible schools, but there was one accredited Bible college, Berkshire Christian College. So I applied, and that's how I got to Berkshire. So I always say I became a Christian in 1981 and an Advent Christian in 1982 when I walked onto the campus. And one of the things about Luke is he is now pastoring the church where I spent 13 years, Hickory Grove Advent Christian Church. So he's now pastoring there.
Which
so
honors, just brings honor to, the work that we did while we were there. Mm-hmm. And then our youngest is a doctor. He's a physical therapist, and he lives in downtown Chicago. Mm-hmm. And they just had their first. And all of them have professed faith in Christ, right. Which that's not always the case. Mm-hmm. We've worried about each one of them during their years, but I think they found home and found their roots and raising their families in a way. They're all actively involved in churches and raising godly children and have chosen lovely wives. Yeah, good for them.
Yes.
Yeah, good choices.
Would you share with us where you've pastored?
Okay, yeah. When I got out of Berkshire Christian College, I went, my first stop was an island off the coast of Maine, Swans Island, Maine. And I was an interim pastor there. And I got there in May, and I stayed through October. So I spent the whole summer, loved it, had a blast. It was a 5-mile, 40-minute ferry ride to get out there. And I enjoyed it immensely. I grew and learned so much about ministry. And they said to me, "We love you. Would you stay and be our pastor?" And I said to them, "I would, except for one thing. I'm still single. I got to go find my wife." And, on the island out there wasn't a lot of choices. So, and the elder laughed, and he said, "I understand." So, but I spent 5 months out there, I guess it was. Then I went from there to Lone Star Church in Clifton Forge, Virginia. It's a railroad town in western Virginia. And I was youth pastor there under Pastor Doug Moore. And I was there 1988. I was there for 1 year. Then I met Robin, and Robin and I went to Jacksonville together. That was our first church together. West
Florida.
Jacksonville Advent Christian Church. And I was a youth pastor with Sam Warren over there. And we were there for 2 years. We went back to Massachusetts, and we went to Oak Hill Bible Church, which is a church Robin was involved with. At the time, Art Stone, who actually was interim pastor here, loved working with him, learned so much about ministry from Art Stone. And then he got a call to Rochester, New Hampshire after 18 years. He pastored there for 18 years. And so when he went to Rochester, I took over as interim senior pastor. And I learned a lot and grew through that season. From there, we went to Aurora, Illinois, and we spent 6 years with Kenny and Kim Lattimore, Robin's very best friend, Kim, and Kenny is a dear friend of mine. And so we get to work together for 6 years out there. And I'll always remember this. I got a letter from Hickory Grove down in eastern North Carolina that asked me if I wanted to come be their senior pastor. I walked into Kenny's office and I said, "Kenny, I could spend 20 years here with you, but I feel like God's calling me." And he said, "Then Bob, you got to go. You got to follow God's calling." So we went to Hickory Grove in eastern North Carolina, 4 Oaks, North Carolina, and I spent 13 years as the senior pastor there. One of my mentors said, "When you look back over your ministry, there's always a sweet church." And I'd say Hickory Grove was definitely my sweet church. And then I ended my ministry. I spent 3.5 years in Lenore, North Carolina, in the mountains at Tabernacle Church. So it's been a great journey, and my honor to serve the Lord for sure.
Tell us, our viewers, when the first time was that you came to Advent Christian Village.
I came as a college student, choir tour. So I came and visited when we were doing choir tour, and we happened to do the Southern tour. I believe it was my senior year, so in '83 would be when I came down and saw the facility and knew of the place because of my first husband's family. I was married at the time when we came down, so his grandparents were here, and just outside the gates in one of the neighborhoods there.
And it's amazing the number of people we've had conversations with for this program who came as a part of a choir tour or a tour from college.
Yes, I came in late December of 1985. I was on the basketball team at Berkshire. We went on a 3-week trip during the winterim. And we came down here and spent a night, and we played like about 9 to 10 games around Florida and going back up the East Coast. And I remember turning on to the village, and I looked up, I saw the water tower, and I saw the, we call them the Dowling Park Eagles all sitting on it. I went, really? But anyway, but I fell in love with it. And then I started doing Camp Swanee's like a year and a half or 2 years later. And I've done I just recently did my 19th or 20th senior camp at Camp Swanee, high school camp, preaching to the high school kids. But I remember my first time walking around going, I could end up here someday. Here I am.
Robin, did you think the same thing?
No. We lived 2 years in Jacksonville, and I do not love Florida weather. I must confess. I am a mountain girl. And when we had those 3.5 years in Lenore and being able to go up to the mountains and enjoy the foliage and the change of the seasons and a little bit of snow, I was in heaven. But I came kicking and screaming. And it's taken me a little, I was a little lost when we first came here. But I have found, and I just recently told Bob that, when you are a pastor's family, there's seasons where you feel very alone. Your relationships, I don't know, there may be pastors' wives that are watching and can really empathize with this, but your friendships are very guarded because sometimes those friendships are used to get to the pastor. So you're very careful and very cautious. So I tended to be very cautious about my relationships. So I found my friendships were outside of the church setting. That's not been the case since I've been here, because I'm no longer, that's not my role anymore. And I don't feel lonely here. I feel very supported. I feel very invited into families' lives, and they're not just my first husband's family, which they have been wonderful.
Yes.
But it extends beyond that. And it extends beyond even our connection with our Berkshire family. Yeah. You know, there are just people, there's just a culture. I'm not lonely here at all. So I will put up with the climate for the warmth of the people.
Well said.
Yeah.
September and August are not usually my favorite months, and I'm a native Floridian, so I can.
Yeah. He loves the warmth. He likes the hotter the better. Matter of fact, he goes out when it's
afternoon. Huh?
Yeah, like 4 or 5 o'clock when it's the hottest. That's when he would rather mow the lawn.
We'll tell our viewers where you live off campus.
We
don't have to give your address.
Yeah, we live in Butterfield Acres. Yeah, we actually bought the land way before we had decided that when we were coming down.
A year or two before we came, right? A year, yeah.
And Bob, share with us what you're doing now at the village.
Okay, so when I came on board, of course, Robin got a job. She works in finance here, and they didn't know what to do with me. I don't think I had computer skills enough to do something. So I said, wherever you need help, and I've said that from day one, wherever you need help. So I started in housekeeping, and I worked in Smith Riverview, Phillips, Dowling House, Carter House for a number of months. Then I started working at Copeland Community Center, and I enjoyed working up there. And I was doing mornings in housekeeping, afternoons at Copeland Center. Then I went to maintenance full-time, worked full-time down at maintenance. And
you're the power washer, painter guy.
Power washer, painter guy. One of the grounds guys always says, Bob, you put the makeup on the village. I said, okay. So pressure washing, painting stripes, whatever needs to be done. And then just recently, actually started this morning, in the mornings I'm now down at Village Square, helping out down there, utility worker. In afternoons at Copeland Center. But it's really been, the best part is people and the people you bump into, conversations you have. I mean, I asked day one when I was interviewing, I said, can I pray with people? Absolutely. So as I go through my day, I've been blessed to be able to just pray with a lot of different people in all the various places that I've worked here. And I look for those opportunities and ask God to open those up. So I've really enjoyed the aspect of the people I've got to connect with and know and check and see how they're doing and pray with. It's a joy. But she's got 8 weeks and she's retiring.
But I understand you're doing some fill-in services around?
Yes, God has opened the door to do lots of supply ministry, and I've really enjoyed that. My first year here, I spoke 19 times at different places. And this month, I'm actually speaking every Sunday. Different churches. And so God has opened that door for me to do pulpit supply, and I really enjoy that too.
And you told me since you've retired and moved here, you've written...
Yes, I always wanted to write a book, one book, and I tried to do it as a pastor, but I just couldn't pastor and preach and write. So when I got here, in a 5-month span, I wrote 4 books. And
They were in rough draft form.
yes, I mean, they were always in my heart and rough draft kind of form, but I was able to put them together. So I wrote one on preaching. I wrote one on my last sermon. If I had one opportunity to preach left, what would I preach? I wrote one entitled Ordinary People, Extraordinary God. And then my last one's the one I always wanted to write. I wrote a book entitled The R Word, Why All This Fuss About Revival. So, yeah, I'm thankful to God that I was able to do that.
Well, I'm going to ask each of you, because of your experiences in numbers of areas, what advice would you give a young person today?
I learned a really difficult a lesson very young. To be widowed at 25, it shifts, it sorts out what's important, because you don't see a hearse towing a U-Haul. So my advice would be to a young person is, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't worry about that. Don't pursue things that aren't eternal. Because when you look back, the things that matter the most are the things you can take with you. And that's the people and the relationships and the care, the love and care of being present in the moment. So those seasons with children, those seasons with your career, those seasons of creating a home and all that, you go back to where you came from. Those things, you start unpacking those things as you grow older. So don't make them a priority. Don't let them consume your life. Just sort out and do the things that matter.
Bob, what about you?
Yes, I would just dip straight into the book of Ecclesiastes right at the very end, where the writer of Ecclesiastes says, fear God and keep his commandments. And so in that book, he is saying, enjoy life, but know that you are going to give an account to God for everything that we do. And then I would just borrow a line from Coach Peters. He always sings and says, love the people that God gives you. So enjoy life, love God, and love the people that God gives you.
What wonderful advice for all of us at any age. Thank you so much for tuning in to Front Porch Conversations. We hope you'll come back again.